A human rescues a fierce alien warrior woman from a savage fight. Then she pleads for him. Marcus Chen had never expected his salvage run to the Kepler station wreckage would change everything. The massive space station hung like a broken skeleton against the star-filled void, its hull cracked open like an egg, spilling debris in a slow, deadly dance around what remained of its superstructure. 3 months ago, the station had been home to over 50,000 beings from a dozen different species. Now, it was a tomb, courtesy of the Vrakta raiders who had swept through this sector like a plague. The Wanderer, Marcus's modified cargo hauler, drifted silently through the debris field. Its stealth systems hummed quietly, masking their heat signature and electromagnetic emissions from any potential threats. Marcus had spent the last 5 years as an independent salvage operator, picking through the bones of civilization's failures in the Outer Rim territories. It wasn't glamorous work, but it kept him fed and gave him the freedom he craved after his discharge from the Terran Defense Corps. Picking up some interesting readings from Section C7, Aria, his ship's AI, announced in her crisp synthetic voice. Multiple high-value components detected, including what appears to be intact quantum processors and antimatter containment units. Marcus leaned forward in his pilot's seat, studying the holographic display that materialized before him. The section in question had been part of the station's high-security research wing. If there were intact quantum processors there, he was looking at enough credits to upgrade his ship's entire propulsion system. "Any life signs?" he asked, more out of habit than hope. After 3 months, the chances of finding survivors were virtually zero. "Negative on standard biosignatures, but I am detecting some unusual energy patterns. Recommend caution." Marcus guided the Wanderer toward the twisted remains of Section C7, using the ship's mechanical arms to clear larger pieces of debris from their path. The section had been sheared almost completely away from the main station, held in place by only a few structural supports and power conduits. Through the massive breach in the hull, he could see into what had once been a pristine research facility. As they drew closer, Marcus noticed something odd. Several of the laboratory modules showed signs of recent activity. Scorched walls, blast marks, and what looked like claw marks gouged deep into the metal. The damage was fresh, far too recent to have been caused during the initial raid. "Aria, those energy patterns you detected, can you isolate their source?" "Analyzing now. The readings appear to be coming from Laboratory Module 7, Alpha. The patterns are consistent with active plasma weaponry and, Marcus, I'm detecting movement." Marcus felt his pulse quicken. Movement meant either survivors or something far worse. In his experience, the Vrakta sometimes left behind hunting parties to eliminate any potential witnesses or salvage valuable technology for themselves. He reached for the controls of his ship's defensive systems, but hesitated. If there were actually survivors in there, going in armed might be seen as a hostile act. "Can you get a visual on the movement?" "Attempting to penetrate the facility's interior barriers now." Aria paused for several seconds, processing data. Visual contact established. "Marcus, you need to see this." The main display flickered to life, showing the interior of Laboratory Module 7, Alpha, through the ship's external cameras and sensor array. What Marcus saw made his blood run cold. The laboratory had been converted into some kind of arena, its equipment pushed aside to create a circular fighting space. Around the perimeter, dozens of figures watched from the shadows. Vrakta raiders, their reptilian forms unmistakable even in the dim emergency lighting. In the center of the improvised arena, a lone figure fought desperately against 3 opponents. Even through the grainy feed, Marcus could see she was magnificent. Tall, powerfully built, with movements that spoke of years of combat training and natural grace. Her skin had a faint blue tint that marked her as Zephyrian, one of the warrior races from the Andromeda sector. She wore what remained of a military uniform, torn and bloodied from hours of combat. The Zephyrian woman wielded 2 curved blades that glowed with their own inner light, marking them as monomolecular weapons of exceptional quality. She moved like a dancer, spinning and striking with precision that would have been beautiful to watch under different circumstances. But Marcus could see she was tiring. Her opponents were fresh, rotating in and out to wear her down systematically. "They're playing with her," Marcus muttered, recognizing the cruel game for what it was. The Vraktha were known for their sadistic entertainment practices, often capturing strong opponents and forcing them to fight for the amusement of the pack. The fights were designed to be prolonged and brutal, with the eventual outcome never really in doubt. As he watched, one of the Zephyrian's opponents, a massive Vraktha warrior with scarred hide and cybernetic implants, landed a glancing blow with his powered club. The woman stumbled, her left arm hanging uselessly at her side, and Marcus saw her face for the first time. Even marked with exhaustion and pain, she was striking. Her features were sharp and angular, with high cheekbones and large, luminous eyes that burned with unquenched defiance. Silver hair fell in braids around her shoulders, many of them now matted with blood. "She's military," Marcus observed, noting the disciplined way she continued to fight even while injured. "Look at her stance. Her weapon handling, that's not civilian training." "Confirmed," Arya replied, running facial recognition protocols. "Identity match found. She is Commander Zerakai Threshmorn, formerly of the Zephyrian Second Fleet. Listed as missing in action following the Battle of Kepler's Edge 6 months ago." Marcus's estimation of the woman's chances dropped even further. If she'd been fighting for 6 months, it was a miracle she was still alive. The Vrakt must have captured her during the battle and kept her as a prized fighting slave. The thought filled him with a cold rage that surprised him with its intensity. On the screen, Commander Threshmorn dispatched one of her opponents with a precise thrust to the throat, but the effort left her exposed. The remaining 2 Vraktha closed in, sensing weakness. One of them, a sleek, fast-moving scout, darted behind her while she was engaged with the larger warrior. Marcus saw the killing blow coming before she did. "The hell with this!" he growled, his hands flying over the control panels. The Wanderer's engines roared to life, and the ship accelerated toward the breached section of the station. "Marcus, what are you doing?" Arya's voice carried a note of alarm. "The tactical situation is disadvantageous. There are at least 40 Vraktha in that facility, and they will certainly have additional forces nearby. I'm not leaving her to die for their entertainment." Marcus was already moving toward his personal armory, pulling on his combat suit with practiced efficiency. The suit was military surplus, scarred from years of use, but still functional. Its reactive armor plating and integrated life support systems had saved his life more times than he cared to count. "Your chances of survival are approximately 12%, Arya calculated helpfully. "That's 12% higher than hers if we do nothing." Marcus sealed his helmet and ran final checks on his weapons. He carried a standard pulse rifle and a plasma sidearm, along with a selection of grenades and other tactical gear. Not exactly an army, but it would have to do. The Wanderer slammed into the side of the laboratory module with carefully controlled force. Its reinforced prow designed for exactly this kind of improvised boarding action. Emergency lights flared throughout the facility as the impact triggered automatic safety systems. In the arena, the Vrakt scattered, their heads turning toward the source of the disturbance. Marcus was already moving, launching himself through the breach in his ship's hull and into the station's artificial gravity field. He hit the deck rolling, pulse rifle already spitting coherent energy at the nearest Vraktha warriors. His first shots took down 2 of the raiders before they could fully react, but the others were already moving, their natural reflexes and combat instincts kicking in. The laboratory erupted into chaos as the Vraktha responded to the unexpected attack. Some rushed toward Marcus while others tried to secure their prisoner or establish defensive positions among the laboratory equipment. Marcus used their confusion to his advantage, moving quickly through the facility while laying down suppressing fire. Commander Threshmorn had not wasted the opportunity. The moment her opponents were distracted, she struck with renewed vigor, her remaining functional blade finding the gap between the large warrior's armor plates. The Vraktha went down with a gurgling roar, dark blood pooling beneath his massive frame. Marcus reached her position just as she finished off her remaining opponent with a spinning slash that opened his throat to the spine. Up close, she was even more impressive than she had appeared on the monitor. Despite her injuries and obvious exhaustion, she radiated an aura of controlled violence that made Marcus's combat instincts tingle with recognition. "Human?" she gasped in accented standard, her luminous blue eyes fixing on his face through his helmet's visor. "What are you doing here?" "Saving your life, apparently." Marcus grabbed her good arm and started pulling her toward cover as pulse fire began to fill the air around them. "We need to move! My ship's this way." She resisted for a moment, pride warring with pragmatism in her expression. Then she nodded sharply and allowed him to guide her through the maze of laboratory equipment. Behind them, the Vraktha were organizing themselves, their initial surprise giving way to fury at the disruption of their entertainment. The running battle through the laboratory was a nightmare of flashing energy bolts and desperately sought cover. Marcus's combat suit absorbed several hits that would have been fatal otherwise, while Commander Thresmorn proved that even wounded, she was a formidable warrior. Her remaining blade seemed to find Vraktha flesh with uncanny accuracy, and more than one raider fell to precise strikes that Marcus barely saw coming. They reached the breach in the hull just as the first wave of Vraktha reinforcements arrived from elsewhere in the station. Marcus could hear the distinctive whine of their atmospheric fighters approaching from outside, which meant they had maybe 30 seconds before the situation became completely untenable. "Go!" he shouted, bodily lifting Commander Thresmorn and heaving her through the breach into his ship's airlock. She landed hard but rolled with the impact, immediately spinning to provide covering fire while he followed. The Wanderer's emergency departure systems had already activated the moment Marcus cleared the hull. The ship's engines fired at maximum burn, tearing away from the station with enough acceleration to strain even the artificial gravity compensators. Behind them, the laboratory module erupted in secondary explosions as the Vraktha vented their frustration on anything within reach. Marcus sealed the inner airlock door and immediately moved to the medical bay, where Arya had already prepared emergency treatment protocols. Commander Thresmorn sat on the examination table, finally allowing herself to show the pain she had been suppressing. Her left arm hung at an unnatural angle, and Marcus could see at least 3 serious wounds that needed immediate attention. "You're insane," she said quietly, but there was something approaching gratitude in her voice. "Coming here alone like that. You should have left me." "Probably," Marcus agreed, pulling on medical gloves and reaching for the trauma kit. "But I've never been accused of being particularly smart. This is going to hurt." She didn't flinch as he began cleaning and treating her wounds, though he could see the strain in the tight lines around her eyes. Her pain tolerance was incredible, suggesting extensive battlefield experience and possibly genetic modification for enhanced endurance. "I am Commander Zarakai Thresmorn of the Zephyrian Second Fleet," she said formally, as if establishing her identity was somehow important despite their circumstances. "Marcus Chen, salvage operator and apparent rescuer of stranded warrior women." He finished sealing the worst of her wounds with biofoam and moved on to setting her broken arm. "How long have you been their prisoner? 6 months, 2 weeks, 3 days. Her precision was unsurprising for a military officer, but Marcus could hear the weight of every single one of those days in her voice. "They captured me during the evacuation of the civilian transports at Kepler's Edge. I chose to stay behind to buy time for the refugees to escape." Marcus paused in his work, looking at her with new understanding. The Battle of Kepler's Edge had been a massacre, with thousands of Zephyrian civilians caught in the crossfire when the Vraktha launched their surprise assault. If she had stayed behind to cover their retreat, knowing she would likely be captured or killed, it spoke to a level of courage and honor that Marcus found both admirable and slightly intimidating. "Well, you're safe now," he said, returning to his work on her arm. "I'll drop you at the nearest Zephyrian outpost once we clear this system." Something shifted in her expression, and when she spoke again, her voice carried a strange urgency. "No, you cannot take me to my people. Not yet." Marcus looked up, surprised. "What? Why not?" "They think you're dead. Your fleet, your family. You do not understand." She gripped his arm with her good hand, her strength surprising him even in her wounded state. "The Vraktha did not capture me randomly. They were waiting for me, knew exactly where I would be. Someone in my own fleet betrayed the evacuation plans." The implications hit Marcus like a cold shock. If there was a traitor among the Zephyrian command structure, returning her directly to her people could be signing her death warrant. But that raised an entirely different set of problems. "So what do you want to do?" he asked, though he had a sinking feeling he already knew where this was heading. Commander Thresmorn looked directly into his eyes, and Marcus saw something there that made his breath catch. Desperation, yes, but also hope. Hope that he might be the answer to a problem that had been eating at her for 6 months. "I need your help," she said simply. I need to find the traitor and stop them before they can do more damage, but I cannot do it alone, and I cannot trust my own people. You are human, an outsider. You have no stake in Zephyrian politics or military hierarchies. You're asking me to help you hunt down a traitor in an alien military that I know nothing about, Marcus said slowly. That's insane on several different levels. Yes, she agreed. But you came into a Vrakta stronghold alone to rescue someone you had never met. Insanity, it seems, may be exactly what this situation requires. Marcus finished setting her arm and activated the auto-splint, buying himself time to think. She was right about one thing. He was already involved, whether he liked it or not. The moment he had pulled her out of that laboratory, he had made himself an enemy of the Vrakt pack that had claimed her. They would not forget or forgive the humiliation, and salvage operators who made enemies of the raiders didn't tend to live very long. On the other hand, getting involved in alien military politics was exactly the kind of complication he had spent the last 5 years trying to avoid. His discharge from the Terran Defense Corps had not been entirely voluntary, and the last thing he needed was to attract the attention of any organized military force. But as he looked at Commander Thresmorn, injured, exhausted, but still burning with determination to protect her people, Marcus found his decision had already been made. All right, he said, surprising himself with the words, but we do this my way. No military protocol, no chain of command. Out here, on my ship, I'm in charge. She studied his face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Agreed, but I should warn you, what we are about to attempt will be extremely dangerous. The traitor has had months to consolidate their position and eliminate potential threats. And the Vrakta, they will not stop hunting us. Let them come, Marcus said grimly, thinking of the warriors he had seen torturing her for their amusement. I've got a few things to say to them anyway. As the Wanderer jumped to hyperspace, leaving the wreckage of Kepler Station behind, neither Marcus nor Commander Thresmorn could have imagined the chain of events they had just set in motion. What had begun as a simple rescue would grow into something far larger, a hunt that would take them to the heart of the Zephyrian military command and force them to confront enemies more dangerous than either had ever faced alone. Behind them, in the twisted ruins of the laboratory module, the surviving Vrakt warriors gathered around their pack leader's corpse and howled their rage into the void. The hunt was on. The hyperspace journey to the neutral zone took 3 days, during which Commander Thresmorn slowly recovered from her injuries while she and Marcus planned their next move. The Wanderer's medical bay was basic but efficient, and Aria's diagnostic programs proved surprisingly adept at treating Zephyrian physiology. By the second day, Zarakai was moving around the ship freely, though Marcus insisted she keep the arm splint for another week. Marcus had retrofitted one of his cargo holds into a temporary living space for her, complete with privacy screens and a sleeping alcove. It wasn't luxurious, but it was better than the slave cells she had endured for 6 months. He found himself watching her sometimes as she moved through the ship, noting the way she carried herself with unconscious military bearing despite her civilian clothes, spare coveralls from his emergency supplies that she wore with surprising dignity. "Tell me about your fleet," Marcus said on the 3rd morning, sharing his breakfast ration with her in the ship's small galley. Who had access to the evacuation plans at Kepler's Edge? Zarakai set down her nutrition pack and considered the question. The Second Fleet consists of 12 heavy cruisers, 36 destroyers, and approximately 200 support vessels. The evacuation plans would have been known to the fleet admiral, the ship captains, their executive officers, and the intelligence staff. That's still a lot of potential suspects. Can you narrow it down? Perhaps. She pulled up a holographic display using the galley's interface, showing the organizational structure of the Second Fleet. Admiral Kethmore is beyond suspicion. He has served with distinction for 40 years and lost 2 sons in previous Vrakta raids. Most of the ship captains I have known personally for years. But there are newer additions to the command staff, officers who were promoted or transferred in the months before Kepler's Edge. Marcus studied the display, noting several highlighted positions. What about this one? Intelligence Coordinator Veltar? Zarakai's expression darkened. A recent appointment. She came from the First Fleet with excellent recommendations, but She trailed off, clearly uncomfortable with the implications. But what? Her family has extensive business interests in the Outer Rim, trade routes, mining operations, shipping contracts. All legitimate, but the kind of enterprises that might benefit from advanced knowledge of military operations. Marcus leaned back in his chair, processing the information. In his experience, following the money was usually a reliable investigative strategy. Any way to check her activities around the time of the battle? Not directly. But there is someone who might help us. Zarakai manipulated the display, zooming in on another section of the fleet roster. Lieutenant Commander Rixel serves as the Admiral's aide-de-camp. He is also my bondmate. Marcus felt an unexpected stab of something that might have been jealousy, which he quickly suppressed. Professional relationships only, he reminded himself. Your husband? The closest human equivalent? Yes. Rixal has access to the Admiral's private communications and meeting schedules. If there was anything suspicious in the days before the evacuation, he would have noticed. Can you contact him safely? Zarakai hesitated. Not through normal channels. But there is a way. The Zephyrian fleet maintains emergency communication protocols for deep reconnaissance missions. If I can reach a secure relay station, I can send a message that will appear to come from a routine intelligence report. Marcus consulted the navigation charts. There's a relay station at Omega Point, about 6 hours from our current position. It's technically neutral space, but it gets a lot of traffic from both sides of the border. That would work. But Marcus... She reached across the table and touched his hand briefly. If Rixel responds to my message, the traitor will know I am alive. Once that happens, we will be hunted by more than just the Brakta. The touch of her hand was surprisingly warm, and Marcus found himself looking into her luminous blue eyes longer than was strictly professional. There was something about this woman, her courage, her determination, the way she carried herself like a queen even when wearing borrowed coveralls, that affected him in ways he hadn't experienced in years. Let's worry about one set of enemies at a time, he said, gently withdrawing his hand. Aria, set course for Omega Point. Best possible speed. The relay station at Omega Point was a ramshackle collection of communication arrays and habitat modules that orbited a dead moon in an otherwise empty system. It served as a neutral meeting ground for information brokers, smugglers, and others who needed to communicate across hostile borders without attracting official attention. Marcus had used it several times over the years to arrange salvage contracts and negotiate with potential buyers. The station's docking bays were crowded with ships from a dozen different species and governments. Marcus guided the Wanderer into an empty berth between a sleek Andromedon courier and a massive Gorthak freighter whose hull was covered in what appeared to be tribal war paint. Stay close to me, Marcus warned as they prepared to disembark. This place attracts all kinds of unsavory characters, and tensions between different species can run high. Zarakai checked her weapons. Marcus had provided her with a standard pulse pistol to replace her lost blades, and nodded. I can take care of myself. The station's interior was a maze of corridors and chambers carved out of the moon's rocky surface. The air was thick with smoke from 100 different substances, and the constant background hum of conversations in dozens of languages created an almost overwhelming din. Marcus led them through the crowds toward the communications center, noting the way other beings stepped aside when they saw Zarakai. Even in civilian clothes, she radiated an unmistakable aura of dangerous competence. The communications center was run by an elderly Terran named Singh, who asked no questions and charged premium rates for absolute privacy. He led them to a shielded booth and activated the quantum encryption protocols before leaving them alone. Zarakai worked quickly at the control interface, her fingers dancing across the holographic keys as she composed her message using the Zephyrian military code. Marcus couldn't read the symbols, but he could see the tension in her posture as she crafted what might be their only chance to contact her allies. There, she said finally, transmitting the message into the quantum relay network. If Rixal receives this, he should respond within 6 hours. They settled in to wait, taking turns monitoring the communication array while the other kept watch for potential threats. The station's neutral status was generally respected, but Marcus had learned never to take safety for granted in places like this. 4 hours into their vigil, the response came. The message was brief and encrypted, but Marcus could see Zarakai's face brighten as she decoded it. Then her expression shifted to concern, then alarm. What is it? Marcus asked. Rixal confirms unusual activity before the evacuation. Veltar had several private meetings with off-world contacts in the weeks leading up to Kepler's Edge. But there's more. She highlighted another section of the message. 3 days ago, Admiral Kethmore was assassinated. Marcus felt a cold chill run down his spine. Assassinated how? Officially, it was a shuttle accident during a routine inspection flight. But Rixal believes it was sabotage. The Admiral had been asking questions about intelligence leaks, requesting reviews of all communications prior to the Kepler's Edge operation. So the traitor is cleaning house, Marcus concluded grimly. Your Admiral got too close to the truth and now he's dead. What about Rixal? Is he safe? Zarakai was already composing another message, her movements sharp with urgency. I'm telling him to go underground immediately. If they killed the Admiral, they won't hesitate to eliminate his aide. But Marcus, there's something else. She showed him another part of the decoded message. According to fleet records, I was officially declared killed in action 3 days ago, the same day as the Admiral's death. The implications were clear and terrifying. Someone had used the Admiral's death as an opportunity to officially erase Zarakai from existence, making sure that even if she somehow returned from captivity, there would be no official record of her survival. They're covering their tracks, Marcus said, making sure there are no loose ends that might expose them. Yes, but it also means they don't know I'm actually alive. The timing suggests they were being cautious rather than responding to confirmed intelligence. Zarakai finished her message to Rixal and transmitted it. This gives us an advantage. They think the threat has been eliminated along with the Admiral. Marcus considered their options. So, what's our next move? We can't exactly walk into Zephyrian space and start making accusations without proof. No, but there might be another way. Zarakai pulled up a star chart, highlighting several systems near the border. Veltar's family business interests. I mentioned they operated in the Outer Rim. If she was working with the Vrakta, there would have to be some way for them to communicate and coordinate, probably through her commercial operations. You're talking about infiltrating her business networks? More than that. I'm talking about finding physical evidence of her collaboration. Financial records, communication logs, maybe even transaction data showing payments from Vrakta sources. Marcus studied the highlighted systems. That would mean going to one of her facilities, which would be heavily defended and probably crawling with security. Yes, but you're a salvage operator. You have legal reasons to be in those systems, and your ship wouldn't attract the same attention as a military vessel. Assuming we can figure out which facility to target, and assuming we can get inside without triggering every alarm in the sector. Zarakai's expression grew thoughtful. Actually, I may know exactly where to look. 6 months ago, just before the evacuation, there were reports of unusual Vrakta scout activity near the Helix Nebula. At the time, we assumed they were conducting reconnaissance for future raids. But what if they were meeting with their contact? Marcus brought up detailed charts of the Helix Nebula region. The area was known for its unusual gravitational anomalies and electromagnetic interference, making it an ideal location for clandestine meetings. Several commercial mining and research facilities operated in the region, including 2 owned by Veltar's family consortium. The Helix Research Station, Zarakai said, pointing to one of the facilities. It's officially a xenobiology lab, but it would be the perfect cover for intelligence operations. Isolated, lightly staffed, with legitimate reasons for maintaining communication arrays and data storage systems. And how exactly do we get inside a research station without authorization? Zarakai smiled, and for the first time since he had rescued her, Marcus saw a glimpse of the warrior's fierce joy in facing a challenging enemy. We don't need authorization, we need an emergency. She outlined her plan quickly. The research station maintained minimal security because of its remote location and supposedly innocuous mission. But like all space facilities, it had extensive safety protocols for dealing with potential disasters. If they could create a convincing emergency situation, a radiation leak perhaps, or a critical system failure, the station would be forced to accept outside assistance. You pose as a contracted repair specialist responding to the emergency, she explained. I'll be your technical assistant. Once we're inside, I can access their computer systems while you provide cover and extract us if things go wrong. It was audacious, dangerous, and completely insane. It was also exactly the kind of plan that might actually work. There's one problem, Marcus pointed out. If this station is really a front for intelligence operations, they'll have military-grade security that won't show up on standard scans. We could be walking into a trap. Possible, Zarakai agreed. But if we do nothing, more people will die. The traitor isn't just selling information to the Vraktha. They're actively helping them plan attacks on civilian targets. Every day we delay gives them more opportunities to cause harm. Marcus looked at her, noting the way her hands clenched into fists when she spoke about civilian casualties. This wasn't just about exposing a traitor for her, it was personal. She had sacrificed her freedom and nearly her life to save refugees at Kepler's Edge, and the thought that her sacrifice had been betrayed by one of her own people was driving her to take incredible risks. "All right," he said finally. "But we do this smart. Full reconnaissance first, detailed planning, multiple exit strategies. And at the first sign that this is more than we can handle, we abort and find another approach." Agreed. She reached across and gripped his hand again, this time holding it firmly. "Thank you, Marcus. I know this isn't your fight, and you've already done more than anyone could ask." Marcus found himself reluctant to let go of her hand. "It became my fight the moment I pulled you out of that arena. Besides," he added with a wry smile, "it's not like I have anywhere else to be." As they prepared to leave Omega Point, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that they were crossing a line from which there might be no return. What had started as a simple rescue mission was evolving into something far more complex and dangerous. They were about to take on not just alien raiders, but a sophisticated intelligence operation backed by military resources and political power. But as he watched Zarakai move through the ship's corridors with renewed purpose and determination, Marcus realized he didn't care about the risks. This woman had captured something in him that he had thought lost forever. A sense of purpose beyond mere survival. A reason to fight for something larger than himself. The Helix Nebula awaited, and with it, answers that would either expose the traitor or get them both killed in the attempt. The Helix Nebula sprawled across space like a cosmic flower, its brilliant gases and stellar formation creating a maze of electromagnetic interference that made navigation treacherous and long-range scanning nearly impossible. It was exactly the kind of place where clandestine meetings could occur without detection by conventional sensors. Marcus guided the Wanderer through the nebula's outer edges, following shipping lanes that had been carefully mapped by commercial interests over the decades. The research station appeared on their screens as they rounded a particularly dense gas cloud, a collection of interconnected modules clinging to a small asteroid, its communication arrays reaching out like metal tentacles into the swirling cosmic mists. "Looks quiet enough," Marcus observed, studying the scanner readings. "I'm picking up minimal life signs, maybe a dozen beings total. That's consistent with a skeleton research crew." Zarakai leaned over his shoulder to study the displays, and Marcus found himself momentarily distracted by her proximity. Even after days aboard his ship, she still carried the faint scent of the combat stims Zephyrian warriors used, mixed with something that was uniquely her own. "The station's communication array is more extensive than it should be for simple research," she noted, pointing to several structures that didn't match standard scientific configurations. "Those look like military-grade quantum transmitters. Could be legitimate." Deep space research requires high-powered communications to reach inhabited systems. But even as Marcus said it, he had to agree that something felt off about the station's setup. "Area. Can you penetrate their security networks?" "Negative. The station is running military encryption protocols that are far beyond what would be necessary for xenobiology research. I can, however, create the emergency scenario we discussed." Marcus activated the ship's cloaking systems, rendering them effectively invisible to all but the most sophisticated sensors. Then he began preparing the false emergency that would get them aboard the station. The plan was elegantly simple. Arya would hack into the nebula's natural electromagnetic fluctuations and amplify them, creating what would appear to be a dangerous radiation surge threatening the research station. Marcus would then emerge from cloak, posing as a freelance repair specialist who just happened to be in the area when the emergency began. "Ready?" Marcus asked, his hands poised over the control interfaces. Zarakai nodded. checking her equipment one final time. She had traded her coveralls for a technician's jumpsuit that managed to look professional despite being slightly too large for her frame. Her weapons were concealed but accessible, and she carried a toolkit that contained both legitimate repair equipment and several items that would help them access secured computer systems. "Execute," Marcus commanded. The nebula around them suddenly blazed with artificial energy as Arya triggered her carefully crafted cascade failure. Radiation detectors throughout the region would be screaming warnings, and any facility in the area would be scrambling to protect their personnel and equipment. Marcus dropped the cloak and activated his emergency transponder, broadcasting his credentials as a certified emergency repair specialist. Within minutes, the research station was hailing them. "This is Helix Research Station to Vessel Wanderer," came a tense voice over the communication channel. "We're detecting dangerous radiation surges in our vicinity. Are you experiencing similar readings?" "Affirmative, Helix Station," Marcus replied, adopting the crisp professional tone he had perfected during his years with the Defense Corps. "I'm reading massive cascade failures in the local electromagnetic matrix. You're going to need immediate shielding reinforcement or risk total system collapse." There was a brief pause, presumably while the station staff consulted their own readings and procedures. "Wanderer, we're showing critical failures in our primary shielding array. Can you assist with emergency repairs?" "That's what I'm here for. Transmitting my certification codes now." Marcus sent the genuine credentials he had earned after his discharge from the military. "I'll need to bring my technical specialist aboard to assess the damage." "Understood. Docking Bay 2 is cleared for your approach." As they guided their ship toward the station's docking facilities, Marcus noticed several details that reinforced his suspicions about the facility's true purpose. The docking bay was larger and more sophisticated than most research stations required, with hardened blast doors and what appeared to be defensive weapon mounts disguised as construction equipment. "They're expecting trouble from someone," he murmured to Zarakai as they prepared to disembark. "Or they're planning to cause trouble for someone else," she replied grimly. The station's interior was sterile and functional, but Marcus's trained eye caught subtle details that marked it as more than a simple research facility. The corridors were wider than necessary, designed to allow rapid movement of personnel and equipment. Emergency blast doors were positioned at strategic intervals, and several sections showed signs of recent construction that didn't match the station's official blueprints. They were met at the airlock by the station's chief engineer, a nervous Zephyrian named Kalrek, who seemed genuinely concerned about the radiation emergency. "Thank the ancestors you were in the area," he said, leading them through the station's central hub. "Our shielding system started failing about an hour ago, and we don't have the expertise to handle this level of cascade failure." Marcus noted the way Zarakai's expression tightened slightly at the engineer's words. The timing was suspicious. The failures had begun almost exactly when Arya had started her electromagnetic manipulation. Either it was an incredible coincidence, or someone on the station had been expecting this exact type of emergency. "Where's the rest of your staff?" Marcus asked as they passed through corridors that seemed unusually empty for a research facility. "Most of our team is in the deep labs, sealed behind emergency barriers," Kolrek explained. "Only essential personnel are moving around the station until the radiation threat passes." They reached the shielding control center, a chamber filled with sophisticated equipment that confirmed Marcus's suspicions. Half of the technology in the room was military-grade, designed for far more than protecting a simple research station from natural radiation. "I'll need to run a full diagnostic on your primary systems," Marcus announced, pulling out his toolkit. "My assistant will check the backup generators and communication arrays." Kolrek nodded and began showing Marcus the station's official system layouts, while Zarakai quietly slipped away toward the communication section. Marcus kept the engineer busy with technical questions and simulated repair procedures, giving her time to access the station's secure data networks. 20 minutes into their charade, Marcus's earpiece crackled with a whispered message from Zarakai. "I'm in. You were right. This place is definitely more than a research facility. I'm seeing communication logs with Vrocked car encryption signatures and financial transfers that match the timing of several recent raids." Marcus felt a cold surge of satisfaction. They had found their smoking gun. But before he could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the station. "What's happening?" Kolrek demanded, rushing to his control panels. I don't know, Marcus replied honestly. The alarms weren't part of their plan, and Arya hadn't triggered any additional emergencies. Sir, we have an unscheduled arrival in Docking Bay 1, came a voice over the station's internal communication system. 3 Vraktha fighters, requesting immediate boarding permission. Marcus felt his blood turn to ice. Their timing couldn't have been worse. They had arrived during what appeared to be a scheduled meeting between the research station and their Vraktha contacts. Zarakai, we need to move now, he sub-vocalized into his communication device. Almost finished, came her tense reply. I need 60 more seconds to copy these files. 60 seconds they might not have. Marcus could hear the distinctive whine of Vraktha atmospheric engines as the fighters completed their docking procedures. Within moments, the station would be crawling with alien warriors who would definitely recognize Zarakai if they encountered her. Mr. Kolrak, Marcus said carefully, perhaps we should postpone these repairs until your other visitors have concluded their business. The engineer's expression shifted from confusion to alarm to something approaching panic. Other visitors? We weren't expecting anyone else today. Marcus realized with growing dread that Kolrik might actually be a legitimate researcher who had no idea about the station's hidden purpose, which meant their cover story was about to become irrelevant, because the real intelligence operatives would be arriving any moment. Change of plans, he announced, abandoning all pretense as he activated his pulse rifle. We need to find my assistant and leave. Now. Kolrik backed away in terror, but Marcus was already moving toward the communication section, where Zarakai was still working. He could hear heavy footsteps in the corridors beyond, multiple sets of feet moving with military precision toward their location. He found Zarakai hunched over a computer terminal, her fingers flying across holographic interfaces as she copied terabytes of encrypted data onto portable storage devices. Her face was grim with concentration, but Marcus could see the tension in her shoulders as the footsteps grew closer. We're blown, he announced. Vrakt fighters just docked and there are hostile forces moving through the station. 30 more seconds, she replied without looking up. This data could expose the entire conspiracy. Names, dates, payment records, communication logs, everything we need to prove Veltar's betrayal. Marcus positioned himself at the entrance to the communication center, pulse rifle ready. Through the doorway, he could see shadows moving in the main corridor, coming closer with each passing second. 20 seconds, Zarakai announced. The first Vraktha warrior rounded the corner just as she spoke, his reptilian features twisting into a snarl of recognition when he saw her. Marcus fired without hesitation, his pulse beam catching the alien's center mass and dropping him to the deck. But more were coming. Marcus could hear them calling to each other in their harsh guttural language. 10 seconds! Marcus threw a concussion grenade down the corridor, buying them precious moments as the explosion sent the approaching warriors diving for cover. But he could hear more enemies moving through parallel corridors, attempting to surround their position. Got it! Zarakai announced, pulling the storage devices from the computer and triggering a virus that would wipe the system's memory. But we're cut off from the docking bay. They're between us and the ship. Marcus consulted his mental map of the station's layout. There was another route to the docking bay through the laboratory sections, but it would take them past what Kolrek had described as the deep labs, where the station's main staff was supposedly taking shelter. This way, he decided, leading her through a secondary corridor that curved around the station's central hub. Behind them, he could hear the Vraktha forces regrouping and beginning a systematic search of the facility. The laboratory section was a maze of interconnected chambers filled with sophisticated research equipment. But as they moved through the complex, Marcus began to notice details that didn't match its supposed purpose. Many of the experiments appeared to be weapons tests, and several chambers contained what looked suspiciously like torture equipment. They've been experimenting on prisoners, Zarakai said quietly, her voice tight with controlled rage as they passed a chamber filled with containment cells. Vrakt, Zephyrian human. They've been testing something on captured beings from multiple species. Marcus felt sick as he realized the true scope of the conspiracy they had uncovered. This wasn't just about selling intelligence to the enemy. Someone was conducting illegal experiments that violated every treaty and convention governing warfare in civilized space. They reached a junction in the corridor system where their path to the docking bay intersected with the main route the Vrak forces were using to search the station. Marcus could see the aliens moving in organized search patterns, their weapons ready and their attention focused. "We need a distraction," he whispered to Zarakai. She smiled grimly and pulled a device from her toolkit, an electromagnetic pulse generator designed for disabling enemy equipment. This should disrupt their communications and weapon systems for about 60 seconds. Do it. The EMP detonated in a brilliant flash that temporarily blinded both humans and aliens alike. Marcus and Zarakai ran through the chaos, racing for the docking bay while the Vrak warriors struggled with suddenly malfunctioning equipment. They reached the Wanderer just as the enemy forces were recovering from the electromagnetic pulse. Marcus threw himself into the pilot's seat while Zarakai sealed the airlock and activated the ship's defensive systems. "Emergency departure!" Marcus shouted to Arya as he fired the engines at maximum burn. The ship tore away from the station with enough acceleration to strain the inertial compensators, while pulse fire from the recovering Vrak forces lit up the space around them. They had barely cleared the station's immediate vicinity when 3 Vrak fighters launched in pursuit, their sleek forms cutting through the nebula's swirling gases like predatory sharks. "They're gaining on us," Zarakai reported from the weapons control station. "Our ship isn't built for high-speed combat." Marcus smiled grimly as he guided them deeper into the nebula's most turbulent regions. "No, but it's built for surviving in places that would tear apart most military vessels. Let's see how well those fighters handle some real electromagnetic interference." He plunged the Wanderer into a region where stellar radiation and gravitational anomalies created a constantly shifting maze of energy fields and spatial distortions. One of the pursuing fighters immediately lost engine power and began tumbling through space, its pilot struggling to regain control in the chaotic environment. The remaining 2 fighters were more persistent, their pilots skilled enough to navigate the treacherous conditions while maintaining pursuit. But Marcus had been operating in environments like this for years, and he knew tricks that military training didn't teach. He guided them through a particularly dense concentration of charged particles, using the ship's specialized shielding to protect them, while the pursuing fighters were forced to reduce speed to avoid critical system overloads. When they emerged from the interference field, they were alone in space, the Vrak fighters lost somewhere in the nebula's deadly embrace. "That was closer than I would have preferred," Marcus said as they jumped to hyperspace, putting light years between them and their enemies. Zarakai was already examining the data they had recovered from the research station, her expression growing darker with each file she opened. "Marcus, this is worse than we thought." "The conspiracy involves at least 6 high-ranking Zephyrian officers, and they've been feeding information to the Vrakte for over a year. How many people have died because of their betrayal? Thousands, maybe tens of thousands." Her hands trembled slightly as she highlighted casualty reports that matched perfectly with intelligence the traitors had provided to their enemies. "But there's something else. According to these communication logs, they're planning something big. A coordinated attack on the Zephyrian homeworld itself." Marcus felt the full weight of what they had discovered settle on his shoulders. This wasn't just about exposing a traitor anymore. They had stumbled onto a conspiracy that could destroy an entire civilization, and now they were the only ones who knew about it, carrying information that could save millions of lives if they could get it to the right people. But first, they had to survive long enough to deliver it. The safe house Marcus had chosen was a derelict mining platform in the Vega system, abandoned decades ago when the asteroid field it had serviced was finally exhausted. Its location was known only to a few independent operators like himself, making it the perfect place to analyze the stolen data without fear of discovery. The platform's life support systems were minimal but functional, powered by a small fusion reactor that Marcus had installed during a previous visit. He and Zarakai had spent the last 18 hours poring over the intelligence they had recovered, and what they had found painted a picture of betrayal so comprehensive that it took Marcus's breath away. 6 confirmed conspirators in the Zephyrian command structure, Zarakai said, highlighting names and positions on the holographic display. Intelligence Coordinator Veltar, as we suspected, but also Fleet Admiral Dexnar of the 4th Fleet, General Colvin of the Planetary Defense Forces, and 3 others in strategic positions throughout the military hierarchy. Marcus studied the organizational chart, noting how the conspirators were positioned to control information flow throughout the Zephyrian military. "They've been systematically compromising your entire defense network," Every major engagement for the past year has been leaked to the Vraktha in advance. It explains so many defeats that seemed impossible, Zarakai said bitterly. Battles where we had every advantage but somehow walked into perfectly prepared ambushes. Raids where the Vrakt knew exactly which civilians to target and which military assets to avoid. The scope of the betrayal was staggering. According to the communication logs, the conspirators had been selling information to the Vraktha for over 18 months, providing detailed intelligence on military dispositions, civilian evacuation routes, and defensive capabilities. In exchange, they had received vast sums of money and promises of high-ranking positions in the puppet government the Vraktha planned to establish after conquering Zephyrian space. But the most terrifying discovery was the final phase of their plan, outlined in a series of encrypted messages between Veltar and a Vraktha commander identified only as the Broken Fang. Operation Skyfall. Marcus read from the decoded intelligence. A coordinated assault on the Zephyrian homeworld designed to cripple your planetary defense network in the first few hours of the attack. Zarakai's hands clenched into fists as she read the operational details. They're planning to disable our orbital defense platforms from within, using access codes provided by General Colvin. Once the platforms are down, the main Vrakt fleet will move in and begin systematic bombardment of major population centers. When? According to this timeline, they're targeting the Festival of Unity next week. Billions of Zephyrians will be gathered in major cities to celebrate our most important cultural holiday. The casualties would be... She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Marcus felt a cold rage building in his chest. He had seen the aftermath of Vraktha raids, the casual brutality they inflicted on civilian populations. The thought of them having free access to an entire world of defenseless beings was enough to make him want to hunt down every conspirator personally. We have to warn them, he said simply. How? I'm officially dead, remember? And even if I could somehow contact the legitimate Zephyrian command structure, who would I trust with this information? Any communication channel we use could be monitored by the conspirators. Marcus considered their options. The problem was that they needed to reach someone in authority who could act on the intelligence, but anyone with sufficient rank to mobilize planetary defenses was potentially compromised. And they couldn't simply broadcast the information publicly because that would give the conspirators time to escape or accelerate their timeline. What about your bondmate? Marcus asked. You said he was the Admiral's aide. Is he still in a position to reach other fleet commanders? Zarakai consulted her personal communicator, which had been modified with military encryption protocols. I received another message from Rixal 2 days ago. He's gone underground as I suggested, but he still has contacts within the loyal portions of the fleet. Can he reach Fleet Admiral Tolmec of the First Fleet? Marcus had done his research on Zephyrian military leadership, looking for officers who were both powerful enough to act and clean enough to trust. Possibly. Tolmec was Admiral Kethmore's closest friend and ally. If anyone would believe evidence of this conspiracy, it would be him. Zarakai paused, her expression troubled. But contacting Rixal will expose our location to anyone monitoring communications traffic. Once we send that message, we'll have maybe 6 hours before hostile forces converge on our position. Marcus considered the tactical situation. 6 hours would be enough time to transmit the stolen intelligence and receive confirmation that it had reached Admiral Tolmec. But it would also be enough time for the conspirators to mobilize significant forces against them. Then we'd better make sure we're not here when they arrive, he decided. Send the message, but we'll transmit everything we've discovered and then get out of this system as fast as possible. As Zarakai began composing the encrypted message to her bondmate, Marcus started preparing the platform's communication array for maximum range transmission. The message would need to reach Admiral Tolmec through several relay points, and there was always a chance it could be intercepted or corrupted during transmission. There's something else, Zarakai said as she worked. According to the intelligence we recovered, the conspirators have been planning for the possibility that their activities might be discovered. They have contingency plans that include the elimination of key Zephyrian political leaders and the installation of their own people in positions of power. A coup, Marcus realized. They're not just planning to sell out your homeworld, they're planning to take control of it themselves once the Vraktha have done the dirty work. Yes, and that means that even if we successfully warn Admiral Tolmec, we'll still need to provide him with specific intelligence about which officers can be trusted and which ones are part of the conspiracy. The message to Rixel was necessarily complex, containing not just the raw intelligence data but also detailed analysis of the conspiracy's structure and recommended countermeasures. It took nearly 2 hours to compose and encrypt properly, during which time Marcus found himself watching Zarakai work with growing admiration. She approached the task with the same focused intensity she had shown in combat, her mind sharp and analytical as she organized the information in ways that would be most useful to the loyal Zephyrian forces. But Marcus could also see the emotional toll the betrayal was taking on her. These weren't just military colleagues who had sold out their own people. Many of them were beings she had known personally, officers she had served with and trusted. "Ready," she announced finally, her hand hovering over the transmission controls. Marcus activated the platform's defensive systems and began warming up the Wanderer's engines. Once they sent the message, they would need to leave immediately. Send it. The quantum-encrypted burst transmission lasted only seconds, but Marcus knew that those few seconds had probably signed their death warrants. Somewhere in the intelligence networks of both the Zephyrian military and the Vract Alliance, monitoring systems would have detected the transmission and begun tracing its source. "How long until Admiral Tolmec receives the message?" Marcus asked as they hurried toward their ship. "If Rixal is able to reach him immediately, perhaps 2 hours. But military command structures move slowly, especially when dealing with intelligence of this magnitude. It could be 6 hours or more before any action is taken." Marcus guided the Wanderer away from the mining platform, setting course for the edge of the Vega system. They needed to put as much distance as possible between themselves and their former hiding place before enemy forces arrived. But even as they jumped to hyperspace, Marcus knew they were only buying time. The conspirators would not simply ignore the threat they represented, they would hunt them across the galaxy if necessary to prevent their intelligence from reaching the wrong people. "Where can we go?" Zarakai asked as she monitored their pursuit sensors. "The conspirators have access to military-grade tracking technology, and the Vraktha have their own intelligence networks. They'll be watching every known safe harbor and neutral port." Marcus was already considering their options. Most of the usual hiding places for independent operators would indeed be compromised, either through official surveillance or criminal informants. They needed somewhere unexpected, somewhere their enemies wouldn't think to look. "I have an idea," he said finally. "But you're not going to like it." The Terran embassy on Kepler Prime was the last place anyone would expect a wanted Zephyrian military officer to seek refuge. The planet was officially neutral in the ongoing conflicts between the various alien species, and its diplomatic quarter was protected by ancient treaties that even the Vraktha generally respected. But getting to the embassy would require them to travel through heavily monitored space lanes and pass multiple security checkpoints. And once they arrived, they would be completely dependent on the goodwill of the Terran Diplomatic Corps, a group that had no particular reason to trust either of them. "The embassy staff won't just take our word for this conspiracy," Zarakai pointed out as they approached the Kepler Prime system. "We'll need some way to convince them that the intelligence is genuine." Marcus had been thinking about that problem during their journey. The Terran Diplomatic Corps included intelligence specialists who would be able to verify the authenticity of the stolen data, but only if they could be persuaded to examine it in the first place. "Leave that to me," he said. "I still have some contacts in the Terran military establishment, people who know my record and might be willing to listen." The approach to Kepler Prime was nerve-wracking, with multiple scans and identification checks as they passed through layers of system security. But Marcus's credentials as a Terran citizen and registered salvage operator were legitimate, and their cover story as tourists seeking diplomatic services was mundane enough to avoid suspicion. The Terran embassy was a massive structure in the heart of Kepler Prime's diplomatic quarter, its architecture deliberately imposing to project the power and authority of the human government. Marcus and Zarakai passed through several security checkpoints before finally reaching the office of the military attaché. Commander Sarah Rodriguez was a career intelligence officer who had served with distinction in several interspecies conflicts. Marcus had worked with her briefly during his time with the Defense Corps, and he hoped that professional relationship would be enough to get them a hearing. "Marcus Chen," she said with surprise as they were shown into her office. "I heard you were working the salvage trade out in the Rim territories. What brings you to my corner of the diplomatic corps?" Marcus gestured to Zarakai, who had remained silent during their approach to the embassy. "The intelligence she's carrying could prevent a massive civilian catastrophe." Rodriguez studied Zarakai with the trained eye of a professional intelligence officer, noting the Zephyrian's military bearing and the way she carried herself despite wearing civilian clothes. "And you are Commander Zarakai Threshmorn of the Zephyrian Second Fleet," Zarakai replied formally, "though according to official records, I am dead." Rodriguez's expression shifted to sharp attention. The name was familiar to anyone who followed interspecies military affairs. Zarakai's sacrifice at Kepler's Edge had been widely reported throughout Allied space. "I'm listening," Rodriguez said, activating the security protocols that would ensure their conversation remained completely private. Over the next hour, Zarakai laid out the full scope of the conspiracy, providing detailed intelligence about the planned attack on the Zephyrian homeworld and the network of traitors who were making it possible. She presented the evidence methodically and professionally, answering Rodriguez's increasingly sharp questions with precision and clarity. Marcus watched the Terran commander's face as she absorbed the implications of what they were revealing. The attack on the Zephyrian homeworld would destabilize the entire sector, potentially leading to a collapse of the current balance of power and opening the way for Vract expansion into previously neutral territories. This intelligence, if accurate, represents a threat to Terran interests as well, Rodriguez concluded after reviewing the evidence. The Vroktath would use a conquered Zephyrian homeworld as a base for further expansion into our trading routes. "Then you'll help us get this information to Admiral Tolmec?" Marcus asked. Rodriguez was quiet for several minutes, considering the political and military ramifications of what they were asking. Finally, she nodded. "I'll establish a secure communication channel with Admiral Tolmec and provide him with full copies of your intelligence. But I should warn you, this embassy will become a target once word of your presence here spreads." "How long do you think we have?" Marcus consulted his chronometer. "The message we sent should have reached Admiral Tolmec by now. If he acts on it immediately, loyal Zephyrian forces might begin arresting the conspirators within the next few hours. But if the conspirators realize they've been exposed," his words were interrupted by the sudden wail of emergency alarms throughout the embassy complex. Rodriguez was already moving toward her communication console, her face grim with the certainty of someone who had seen this scenario play out before. "Ambassador, what's the situation?" She spoke rapidly into her secure communicator. "We have multiple contacts approaching the embassy quarter," came the reply. 3 Vrocked heavy cruisers and what appears to be a mixed squadron of fighters from several different species. They're demanding the immediate surrender of 2 fugitives believed to be hiding in Terran territory. Marcus felt his blood turn cold. The enemy had found them faster than he had thought possible, and now they had brought enough firepower to level half the diplomatic quarter if their demands were refused. "Looks like our 6 hours are up," he said grimly.